I think media is the most influenced domain in terms of Chinese interference. And I think the reason why I think lots of people expect that Taiwan could be #1 over here, but because we measure the effects of Chinese interference, and because we got lots of like resilience, we got civil society and our governments, they're kind of resilient to Chinese interference. So which means that we don't have that much effects here in Taiwan, and that's why we didn't rank like #1 over here. I mean, in terms of the traditional media, because of like anti-red media movement, means that there's a less interference for the traditional media. However, if you like social media, China is really good at disseminating all this disinformation on social media. And also they're really good at approaching not just the traditional media itself, but the individual journalists. So if individual journalists like join the training or receive pressure from China, it also counts as the Chinese interference. And that happened a lot here in Taiwan.
You look at exposure to Chinese influence, pressure from China, and the effect of that pressure. So I was wondering, is there any link that you saw between those three? Does more influence necessarily result in more tangible results?
We expect that if you're exposed to Chinese interference, and it means that you'll get more pressure, but it doesn't happen in each domain. So which means that, for example, in economy, if you have more connections, if you're like exposed to Chinese influence, and you got more pressure. But like in the military domain, it doesn't happen. So it really depends on like which domain we're talking about. However, I mean, even that there are lots of countries like Japan or the US receive lots of pressure from China, it doesn't mean that they're going to change their behavior or if there's anything change on their side. So that's why we also measure the effects of all these countries.
And in terms of different regions of the world, did you see any interesting trends in terms of where China is concentrating its influence? Is it focusing more on regional neighbors or trying to win influence in the West?
I think it really depends. For example, if you look at the Western country, I think China focus a lot on academia and also like think tanks. But if you look like countries like Cambodia or like countries there in Africa, they didn't really focus on academics, but rather on other side of like economics or military stuff. People often criticize that there are lots of organizations or like even journalists or experts or scholars, they kind of underestimate or sometimes overestimate or sensationalize Chinese interference. So I think it's time for us to quantify this kind of interference and let the world know like precisely like in which domain, in what field they have been affected by China. And then we'll have because in each indicator we'll have the proof for that. So that's why everybody could be on the same page and we can discuss like Chinese interference with scientific facts.